Hi, I'm quilt pattern designer Rachel Rossi. Today I have a quick little tutorial for you on how to make a postcard quilt. Before we get started, there's a couple things you should know. First off, this tutorial assumes that you already have made the top for your postcard quilt. If you like the one that you see in the video, my snail mail pattern, you can head on over to my website and grab a copy for just $1. Alternatively, if you would like to learn foundation paper piecing in the traditional method and in the freezer paper method, you can take my class on Teachable and actually learn those techniques as you make this postcard quilt. The tutorial you're about to see is part of that class, and so it'll give you a good idea of how class will run, what it'll feel like, and what it's like to be in one of my virtual workshops. So without further ado, here is your free tutorial on how to make a postcard quilt. The supplies needed to create a postcard quilt are pretty basic. The first thing that we'll need is a quilt top, so something like my snail mail pattern or something that you create on your own. You'll need fusible web, Elmer's glue, or even basting spray to keep your layers together, a firm interfacing to give stiffness to the card, fabric for the back, usually white or muslin is good for this so that you can write on it, and a permanent marker. Microns work, Sharpies work, and if you want a tutorial on how to print on fabric, you can check out the link below and actually print the back of your postcard. You'll need a letter stamp. Even though this is a postcard, you are going to need a letter stamp because of the thickness of the card. So make sure that you just check with your postmaster before sending this off if you add more embellishments or anything like that. We're going to start with the back. I cut a piece that's a little too large, but that 4x6 will fit in there. I'm going to stitch a line down the center and 3 lines just for the address. You don't have to stitch these, you can draw these, but I think it's just a little extra detail that's really sweet. So I just grabbed any old piece of interfacing for this part. This is not your extra firm. Just a couple lines of Elmer's glue or whatever you have. If you have some fusible web or basting spray, it all works just fine. We just got to hold everything in place. Make sure it's nice and flat. And I'm going to just trace the outline of my cards so that everything is a nice size and I know how to measure these lines out. I'm just using an erasable fabric marker. This comes off with water. Okay, now that we know about the right size, I can do that line down the center like I said. This is 6 inches long, so I'm going to find my 3 mark and just give myself a guideline for my stitches. So there's where I'm going to stitch down the center. That side will be for writing, and the side that I'm making lines on will be for the address. So it's actually 4 1/4 wide. So I'm going to go 2 1/8 inch for my center line. And I like to give about 1/2 inch above and below for the name and then the second line of the address. And I'll give myself about 1/4 inch of breathing room. This is just marking where I want my stitches to stop and start. So I'm going to stitch down that center line and just the 3 lines for the address. I might stitch on my stamp. I really like to do that. I think it's super cute and it also makes me feel better about sending it through the mail. Before we get started, I'd like to show you what is on my machine. Thought it would be helpful to give you some tips and tricks. First, you'll see that I have a straight stitch plate on. This is not required, but it is helpful to keep your stitches looking really nice. You'll see that it differs from the standard stitch plate with the oval for your needle. And that just helps so that your fabric doesn't go down into the bottom of your machine. So you'll see there's less issues this way. And then I have the Bernina foot number 5. This is the blind stitch foot. It's used in hemming pants a lot, but you'll see there's a little bend right there, and that is so that the needle has room to go down through, but you can still use that blade as a really good marker of where your needle's going to land. So we've got our backing piece, and I'm just gonna put that blade right where I want all of my stitched lines to go, and I'm gonna sew right over that erasable fabric marker. I'm using a wide stitch here, about 2.4, because it's just decorative, and sewing just between the backing fabric and the interfacing. And here I'm going to very carefully start each of my stitch lines because the beginning will be visible. So I'm just lowering my needle down before I start sewing, doing a knot stitch, and then continuing on. And I'll do my very best to stop at the same spot on each line. We're going to set our backs aside for now and prepare the fronts. So put glue, basting spray, or fusible web on your extra firm interfacing. Make sure all your seams are looking good on your snail, and then just press that into place. You don't really need to iron here, but if you'd like to, just make sure it's a dry iron, no steam, or else that glue will just loosen up. Now it's time to sew our quilting stitches. I'm going to do a simple stitch in the ditch, which just means I'm going to run my stitch right along each of the seams. And I'm actually just going to outline the body and shell of the snail. I'm not going to go along every single seam. You can do some free motion here or whatever you'd like. This is a fun little project and you should be as creative as you want. Our front and our back pieces here ready to go, and all I'm going to do is trim them up so that they are matching sizes. So I'm going to cut about 1/8 of an inch bigger on both of them than I want, and then once everything's glued together and I'm sure it's straight, I'm going to cut one last time so that all edges are cut on the same cut. This will help with fraying. Now both pieces are ready to sew together, so we're going to grab that Elmer's glue stick one last time and just put it all over the back on one of our pieces. Again, fusible web, basting spray, whatever you're using, we just need to stick these two pieces together. Trim one last time so that all the edges are cut at the same time on one nice straight cut. Your final size will be 4 by 6. I've switched my stitch plate to the standard stitch plate because my needle is going to be going back and forth, and I changed to a number 20 foot with the open toes. I'm doing a decorative stitch along my edge. You're welcome to do binding or serge or whatever you'd like. Binding does tend to make for a very bulky card and will add to the price of postage. So if you have a Bernina, a simple one, this is probably your number 8 stitch that I'm using. And I'm just letting it go right off the very edge, so it's catching all my raw edges in there as I stitch. It's always a bit of a guessing game when you come to one of these corners, but what I try to do is end where my needle is on the far right side. It doesn't always work out that way, but then I'll make sure my needle's down in the fabric and then pivot. And there are my sweet little edges on my mini postcard. Hi, this is Rachel Rossi, inviting you to join me for my Snail Mail Postcard Quilt workshop. In this class, you won't just be making a postcard quilt, you'll also learn how traditional foundation paper piecing works and how the no-tear method of foundation paper piecing works. This is sometimes known as the freezer paper method and is by far my very favorite method. You'll learn how to create perfectly matching seams, and you can do it all at your own pace. You're welcome to pause, rewind, and even adjust the speed or fast forward to make this class work for you on your schedule. The techniques in this class can be used in any foundation paper piece pattern and will empower you to create more beautiful, more efficient, and more accurate quilts. I can't wait to see you in class!